Amina had the kind of eyes that made people stop and listen, not because they were beautiful, though they were, but because they saw the world with a depth most ignored. In her small village, she was known for her gentle nature and the way she could calm a crying child or cheer an old man with a story. People often said she carried the soul of a griot, though she had no family legacy of storytelling. Her father had died when she was young, leaving only memories and a carved wooden bird that she kept wrapped in cloth. Without him, her mother, Mama Koba, had grown cold and bitter. Once lively and strong, she now spent her days complaining about their misfortunes and comparing Amina to other girls who had brought wealth to their families through marriage. She often muttered, "You were born with beauty but no value," as if her daughter's grace was a curse instead of a blessing. Amina said nothing in return, knowing silence was safer than defense. They lived in a crumbling mud brick home on the edge of the village, away from the laughter and music of the main square. Amina helped with the chores, fetched water, and mended baskets to sell, but it was never enough. To Mama Koba, her daughter was not a helper. She was just another mouth to feed. The sun beat down on the village market as the smell of roasted maize and drying fish drifted through the air. That day, a stranger arrived, his steps uneven, one leg dragging behind the other, supported by a carved walking stick. His name was Juma, and he wore simple clothes, stained with bark and ash. He carried bundles of firewood on his back and moved with a quiet determination that made some pause and others laugh. Children pointed at his limp. Women whispered behind their hands. In a village where strength was prized, Juma's crooked leg marked him as weak. He did not argue or look offended. Instead, he smiled with a strange peace and traded his wood for bread and salt without a word. He made no friends, asked no questions. Some believed he was mute, others said cursed. No one knew where he had come from, only that he now lived alone near the edge of the forest, in a hut barely big enough for one. Amina noticed him sitting quietly near the storyteller's circle in the square, listening as she spoke of animals that talked and stars that whispered secrets. He never clapped or laughed, just watched, and yet his eyes held the same depth as hers, like he too carried 1,000 silent stories. The rumour spread through the village, like wind through dry leaves. The lame woodcutter was seeking a wife. No one knew why. Perhaps he wanted help gathering wood, or someone to cook his meals. Some mocked the idea. What woman would marry a man who limped through life like a broken cart? When Mama Koba heard the gossip, a dark glint lit her eyes. That night, she watched Amina as she cooked over the fire, her hands steady, her face soft with quiet sorrow. "You're good for nothing here," Mama Koba muttered, more to herself than to Amina. "Maybe your beauty can feed you elsewhere." The next day, she went to the market and found the woodcutter stacking firewood near a stall. Without ceremony, she offered him her daughter. "She's strong, obedient, and has no other offers." "You won't get better," she said, her voice like a knife. Juma looked at her, then nodded once. No bride price, no questions. Amina cried when she heard the decision, but her tears meant nothing to Mama Koba. "Better a lame husband than a hungry mouth at home," she snapped. "At least now you'll be someone else's burden." The wedding was held 2 days later. No music, no feast, no guests. Just Amina, trembling in a borrowed dress, and Juma, leaning on his staff, quiet, as always. She did not smile. He did not speak. Only the wind and the birds bore witness. The path to the forest was long and uneven, lined with whispering trees and tangled roots. Amina followed Juma in silence, her feet aching, her heart heavy with dread. She imagined a cold hut, harsh words, perhaps even beatings. After all, That's what Mama Koba had promised her fate would be. But when they reached the clearing, what stood before her was a small but clean hut made of woven reeds and sturdy logs, with smoke curling gently from its roof and carved animals perched along its windowsill. Inside, the air smelled of herbs and firewood. Juma gestured for her to sit and brought her a bowl of warm porridge without a word. He did not touch her, did not shout. Instead, he spent the evening quietly mending a basket while she stared at the fire, unsure what to make of this silence. Days passed. Juma cooked their meals, fetched water, and gave her space. When she spoke, he listened. When she cried alone at night, he left a blanket by the door. He never asked for anything, not her body, not her labor, not her thanks. One morning, he handed her a small knife and a block of soft wood. "Try," he said simply. She hesitated, then began to carve. Slowly, under his guidance, she shaped her first bird. Her hands trembled, but her heart stirred. For the first time in years, Amina laughed, a small sound, unsure of itself. But Juma looked up and smiled, and in that moment, the forest felt less lonely. The storm came without warning, clouds rolling in like waves, the sky darkening, wind howling through the trees. Amina and Juma secured the windows and sat inside the hut, the fire crackling as thunder shook the ground. Rain hammered the roof, and a sudden bolt of lightning struck so close that it lit up the entire room, shaking dust from the beams above. As the thunder rolled away, Amina noticed something unusual. The lightning had shifted the rug in the center of the floor, revealing the edge of a stone beneath it. Curious, she waited until Juma stepped outside to check the roof. She pulled the rug aside and found a trap door, stone, worn and marked with a symbol she didn't recognize. Her heart raced as she gripped the edge and heaved it open. Inside was a narrow pit lined with cloth. Carefully, she reached in and pulled out what looked like fine royal garments, robes of deep indigo and gold embroidery, their texture unlike anything she'd ever touched. Beneath them were scrolls, sealed and faded with age, and at the very bottom, a gold emblem shaped like a lion's head with a ruby set in its mouth, the royal crest of the kingdom. She stared in disbelief. Why would a poor, quiet woodcutter have such treasures? "Put those back," came Juma's voice, low and steady behind her. She turned, guilt and fear rising in her throat. But he wasn't angry. He looked tired, like a man who had carried too much for too long. "I am the king's twin," he said quietly, "born moments after my brother. But a prophecy said 2 sons would divide the kingdom. So I was hidden, and later betrayed. They left me in the wild to die. I chose exile. I chose peace." Amina couldn't speak. Everything made sense now. The way he carried himself, the quiet wisdom in his eyes, his calm refusal to react when others mocked him. She reached for his hand, not out of duty, but something deeper. He did not flinch. "Why hide all this?" she whispered. "Because a throne takes. The forest gave me back my life," he replied. Outside, the storm began to fade, but inside the hut, the air hung heavy with truth. Word spread like wildfire through the kingdom. The king was dying. No healer could cure him, and the royal advisors whispered in fear. With no children of his own, and no heir to name, a hidden truth resurfaced, the legend of the king's twin brother. A child lost, forgotten, or perhaps still alive. Desperate to preserve the throne, the palace sent riders across the mountains and rivers, through villages and farmlands, asking the same quiet question. Had anyone seen a man who walked with a limp and carried silence like a cloak? Days turned to weeks. Then one evening, as the forest hummed with crickets and fireflies danced beneath the moon, Amina and Juma sat by their small fire-carving birds as they always did. The distant sound of hooves broke the night. Soon after, torches flickered between the trees. Juma stood slowly, his face unreadable. 4 men dismounted at their door, their armor marked with the royal seal. "We've come for the prince," the captain said, bowing not in mockery, but reverence. "The kingdom calls you home." Juma shook his head. "I've built a life here. I am no longer theirs." But Amina stood beside him, placing her hand over his. "You are more than what they did to you. You survived. And now your people need you." Juma looked at her. This girl once thrown away like refuse, now shining with quiet fire. Her words rooted in love, not ambition. He sighed, as if surrendering to a truth he'd buried too long. By dawn, he stood at the edge of the forest, wrapped in his old royal cloak. The villagers watched in awe as he passed, recognizing the woodcutter who never begged and never bowed. Amina walked beside him, not as a servant or a shadow, but as his equal. She carried no jewels, only the carved wooden bird he once helped her make. They reached the palace gates by sunset. He did not ride a horse. He walked slowly, painfully, but proudly. But the guards opened the doors without question. Inside, the court waited to greet not a forgotten prince, but a man shaped by exile, tempered by silence, and finally, ready to reclaim what had always been his. The palace was still, heavy with anticipation. Courtiers and elders gathered beneath the domed ceiling, their rich robes swaying as whispers flew like restless birds. Juma stood at the center, his cloak dusted from the road, his staff steady in his hand. Some looked at him with disbelief, others with fear. After all, a man thought dead had returned from the shadows. The high elder stepped forward, wrinkled hands holding a scroll sealed decades ago. "If you are who you claim to be," he said gravely, "you must speak of what only the true prince would know." Juma nodded once, eyes calm. He spoke of the night he was born, the red cloth his mother used to wrap him, the lullaby sung only when the lanterns had gone out. He described the hidden garden behind the palace walls, where 2 boys once played under the moonlight, one with a crown, the other with freedom. He recited the lines of a forgotten royal oath, whispered to him in secret by the palace's first swordmaster. The court fell silent. One by one, heads bowed. The seal was broken, the prophecy fulfilled. He was not just a twin, he was the rightful heir. That afternoon the kingdom crowned him not with pomp, but with quiet reverence. The people chanted, "King Juma the Just," their voices echoing beyond the palace walls. He did not raise his sword, nor shout a claim. He simply stood, grounded and unshaken, shaped not by privilege, but by hardship. Beside him stood Amina, robed in gold, her head held high. No longer the girl discarded at the edge of the village, she now bore the dignity of one who had seen pain and chosen love. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and there, at the edge, hidden behind nobles and guards, stood Mamakoba. The once proud woman now shrank behind a veil, her mouth slightly open, hands trembling. She had come to see a servant's shame, but instead she witnessed a daughter's rise. Amina said nothing. She only looked at her mother once, then turned back to her king, her husband. Trumpets sounded, drums rolled. The throne was no longer empty. It had been earned, not taken. Years passed, and the kingdom flourished under King Juma's quiet wisdom and Queen Amina's warm guidance. The palace no longer echoed with prideful shouts, but with music, learning, and stories told under open skies. In the royal garden, children gathered beneath the tall fig tree where Amina often sat, her lap full of carved wooden birds. They begged for stories, and she never refused. One day, a child asked, "My queen, is it true you were once poor and married to a woodcutter?" Amina smiled gently. Yes, she said, her eyes soft with memory. But he was never just a woodcutter, and I was never just poor. We were both something more, waiting to be seen. She paused, letting the breeze carry her words. Kindness sees through limps, greed only sees gold, she said. The children sat quietly, the weight of her truth sinking in. Far away, in the same crumbling village where Amina's journey began, Mama Koba lived alone. The house sagged, untouched by laughter or light. Those who passed it said an old woman sometimes muttered to herself, eyes cloudy with regret. No one visited, no one remembered. But in the palace, Queen Amina's words were carved into stone and spoken like prayer. A bent tree still gives shade. A bitter mouth forgets the taste of mercy.